I was born here. Actually, I was born in Winston-Salem because my grandfather liked the doctor over there and told my parents if they would go and have the grandchild over there that he would pay for it. And at that time, money was very tight, and I think if they had told them that a veterinarian would deliver me over there, they probably still would have gone. But so I was born in Winston-Salem and lived there probably 4 days, and then or a week, and then moved back to Kingsport. And I've lived here except for school and sometime in at Texas Eastman at Longview, Texas. Those are the only 2 places I've lived except for college.
Oh, okay.
So most of the time I've been here.
Right. And speaking of schooling, I noticed that you attended Catherine Gibbs School.
I went to Catherine Gibbs, and I think they announced yesterday that they're closing all but one of their campuses. And I was sorry to hear that because it was good. I went to Dobbins Bennett, and then went to Agnes Scott College in Atlanta. That's where my father decided that I would go. I was going to go to Sophie Newcomb in New Orleans, and that's where my mother had gone. But my father decided that Agnes Scott would be better. I think it was the nearest thing to a convent he could find at the time. So, anyway, I went to Agnes Scott, which was wonderful training. Wonderful training. Very good school. Hard. And then when I got engaged, my mother and father said that no one in our family was allowed to get married unless they were self-supporting. And so I went to Catherine Gibbs in Boston and certified as an executive secretary so that I could work and get married. And got married and moved promptly to Longview, Texas for 4 years.
Oh, goodness.
And worked as an executive. My first job was the secretary for the secretary to the president of the Longview National Bank.
Was that idea of a woman being self-sufficient before she was to be married, was that common at the time?
Not at all. Not at all. Most people went to college then in preparation to get married. And that's the whole idea, that they would not work after they got married unless there were some unforeseen circumstances. But when I grew up, women were acceptable as teachers, nurses, and secretaries, and that's really the only careers that were open except for retail. It was unheard of for a woman to own a company or to be a doctor, a lawyer, or an Indian chief. I mean, it just wasn't done at that time.
Right.
So I had no other friends that worked except sporadically, you know, just as the fill-in, sometimes did a lot of volunteer work. So it was unusual.
So did you choose to train to be a secretary? Is that what you wanted to be?
I think it was because I wanted to get married, and that was a one-year course that I could take, and it was the best training for that type of job that you could possibly get. A Catherine Gibbs trained executive secretary could walk in anywhere and get a job.
Okay.
And so I was overtrained for what I did for the next couple of years.
And you continued to work after you got married?
I worked until I guess I worked until I had my first child, until I couldn't reach a typewriter anymore. And then to fill my time, I've continued what I'd done as a teenager and taught swimming every summer just for pocket money and to be a little independent. And I ended up, by the time I quit teaching, I taught 9,000 children how to swim. So I said I wanted to get a job when I went into real estate. I said I was glad to get a job where I wouldn't be 80 years old and have a whistle around my neck and be in a bikini. So it was, but I taught an awful lot of kids how to swim.
Excellent. Okay. Tell me a little bit more about your parents and the influences they had on you.
Well, my dad had trained to be a Baptist minister and had not quite finished school in that, because my uncle, who was one of the real movers and shakers here in Kingsport, had asked him to come help him run an insurance company they were forming. My uncle started the newspaper here, the TV station, Kingsport National Bank, and Kingsport Federal, which was a savings and loan. He had started all those things and owned the newspaper most of the time I was growing up. My grandfather had come here in 1920 with Eastman and ended up president of Eastman for 20 years. So his background was in logging. He was from Michigan. So I had a lot of people who had worked very hard. In fact, both my uncle and my grandfather made the comment that if I'd been male, they would have had me in XYZ businesses. They thought that. But women just didn't run businesses back then. And my parents were my mother, of course, wanted me to be the perfect wife and perfect mother. That's what we were all raised to be at that time. My dad ended up owning his own insurance company, and he actually suggested that I go into real estate. But the first place I applied, I was told that they didn't think I'd work hard enough and they wouldn't hire me. So then I had someone else come and ask me to go to work for them as their token female, and that's what they said. They said, "Will you come be our token female in real estate sales?" I said, okay. So I got a little book sent off to the state, got a little book about this big, studied it, went down, but I did tell this person that I wanted to have one more baby. So when I actually went to work and passed the test, I was 3 months pregnant. So not only was I one of the, I think there were 4 or 5 women in the Tri-Cities that were in real estate sales, I was the only pregnant one. So I went into real estate and worked for about 1.5 years, got my broker's license. Now it takes 3 years before you can do that. Got my broker's license, and about 5 or 6 years later, I bought the company because they knew I would probably either go out on my own and start my own company, and they were kind of thinking about selling, so it was the logical thing to do. And I bought the company, and when I bought it was 1979, and it's 1979 in September, and I bought it October 1st. We hit the worst depression in the real estate market that have been in since the Great Depression. I dealt with 18% interest rates.
Oh my.
And I mean, real estate just came to a halt. So I learned about how to deal with borrowing money and, you know, long nights and long days and worrying your head off, and how fun it was to meet a payroll when the market wasn't moving.
Right.
So I built it from there.
And you survived.
And we survived. We survived, and it was very educational.
Now, is that what is known as Blue Ridge Properties today?
Yes, it was Blue Ridge when I bought it.
Okay.
And I joined a franchise. We had not been a franchise, or we had not been the one I wanted to be. I joined Better Homes and Gardens after I'd owned the company about 1 year, and that was a real good relationship. And we belonged to Better Homes and Gardens for 20 years, and then Better Homes and Gardens sold to GMAC. And I just didn't think a car company knew how to sell houses. So we became independent again and never lost our #1 position in the marketplace.
How did the real estate industry take you becoming an owner as a...
Well, I'll say this. I was asked at one point to speak to a minority conference because I was a woman business owner. It was that rare. Men owned companies, and when I went into it, almost all offices were men. And then since I bought it, more and more women went into it because it was the first opportunity women had to go into a job where they could set their own salary. There was such a glass ceiling for women. You know, as I said, you had certain fields you could go into, and it doesn't matter how smart you were, those were the fields that you were allowed to be in, and women just didn't do other things. Nowadays it's so different. But it was the first chance that women had to go into a business where they could make as much as they wanted to make if they were willing to do it and they were good at it. And so it was difficult. I had a lot of opposition. I had a lot of people that felt that I was taking money out of some family's mouth because I was a woman that was working in this field.
How did you deal with that?
Kept right on working.
So you just
kept right on working.
Pushed through.
I was lucky in that the business fit what I could do, and I've certainly used it to build a company. Now we have 5 offices, and I own all the buildings, and 75 agents. And the best benefit I can give you is it gave me an opportunity to get my children to come back to Kingsport that had all left. They'd gone other places to work or to live, and they all ended up coming back here and going to work in the company. And just this last October, I turned the actual running of the company over to them. I'm still chairman, and I still have a hand in, and of course I'm licensed, but they actually run the company now. And we worked together for 12 years till we got to that point. But it's been so rewarding to have done something that enabled me not only to be able to pass on the business to them, but to be with them and work with them and be with them every day. That's been really special.
That's wonderful. Now, As far as the government involvement, I know you're involved both locally and state now because of the Tennessee Real Estate Commission. Talk a little bit about your involvement with the local government and then the state.
Well, the local government, I guess I just had too many opinions not to try to get involved. And so I ran for an unexpired seat, an unfulfilled seat. There were two people that got off the Board of Mayor and Alderman and left two-year slots. So the first thing I thought I'd do was run for one of those. It was only for 2 years. And I ran for it and won it. And then I ran again for the 4-year when that one was up, and I'm in the middle of that one right now. And I'm the only woman on the board at this time. There was, Mayor Blazier was mayor when I went into the board, and there were two, and she said she was so glad to have another woman on the board. And I'm the only one now, which doesn't bother me a bit. And then it's nice to have a hand in making the decisions, because I feel like I'm certainly know more what people are looking for when they come to an area. When I grew up, if you worked in Kingsport, you lived in Kingsport. If you worked in Johnson City, you lived in Johnson City. Very few people didn't live where their occupation was.
Right.
Over the past 10 years, that's changed completely. People have no concern at all about living in Virginia and working in Tennessee and living in Burgonsville, Rogersville, Bristol, Colonial Heights, Johnson City. Wherever they work, they will live where they want to live, where the quality of life is that fits their style. And Kingsport was not working on quality of life issues. And that was my biggest concern on the board, and that's what I've pushed for the whole time. And I'm tickled at the rate we're going. We're finally getting to the point where other people feel the same way I do.
What are those quality of life issues?
Well, the ballparks.
Okay.
You don't know how hard it was to fight for the ballparks. I'm in the middle right now of really pushing the aquatic center, not just a pool, but we need an aquatic center. Pushing for things that supporting the public art, doing things that make people want to live in Kingsport instead of wanting to live in Johnson City. Or, we want to offer a person that wants to live in where they work enough housing, enough, the higher ed center, a place where their kids could go get a 4-year baccalaureate degree. They don't have to leave town. So all those things that have made a difference in why you want to live here is what I've been working for.
And now you've been appointed to the Tennessee Real Estate Commission.
That's a real boon. After all these years in real estate, that's an honor. I was contacted by Governor Bredesen's office last fall and asked if I would like to submit my name for consideration. And I had to do a resume of everything I'd done and why I thought I could be a commissioner. And I was delighted when I heard before the end of the year that they had appointed me a commissioner in real estate. We oversee the licenses of 38,000 licensees. We sit on in judgment of the things that's what we do. We go once a month to Nashville for 2 days. We hear the cases of people that have had complaints against them by the public. Our job is to protect the public. We also hear people who are asking for variances in their license, and people we can revoke licenses or not issue licenses or ask for firms to be audited. And it's a nice responsibility. But my main job in my profession has been to keep it a profession. We worked very hard to be considered something other than cutthroat type salesman. And because I feel like it's a job that requires a lot of education, it requires a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience. And so now I'm in a position to make sure that we can require those things.
Right.
To oversee what people do.
Definitely. I know that you're one of 2 women on the Real Estate Commission.
One of 2. The commission's set up, you have to have 3 from each of the general sections, areas. 3 from East Tennessee, 3 from Middle Tennessee, 3 from West Tennessee. You have to have at least 1 woman, and you have to have at least 1 person over 60. Now I figured I was the person over 60, but I don't know what criteria they used, but I'm the first woman from Kingsport that's ever been on it, the first person, period, from Kingsport that's ever been named to it. And I'm one of 2 women. The other is a very nice lady from Memphis, and we have a couple people that are not. There's 7 that are licensed and 2 that are not, and one of them is a title attorney and one of them is a publisher. The rest are all in the real estate business. So it makes a good, it's a good cross-section of people. We have 4 auctioneers that are licensed, but they mainly do auctions. And we have big companies, little companies. I think I represent the largest company. So,
are you involved in any other political or advocacy groups?
Not really. I've done a lot of volunteer work. I've done a lot of work with the symphony. I was president of the symphony for 3 years, and when it became Symphony of the Mountains, which was a big change for the citizens of Kingsport. I've done a lot of that type of volunteer work on things I believe in. But mostly I've worked.
Yeah.
One thing, if you own a company, you work a lot.
I noticed a few things. I heard about you with the Arts Council of Kingsport.
Yes, I've been on the Arts Council.
And
my mother was a painter. She did portraits and watercolors, and that was her job. Actually, she was a stay-at-home mom, but she did paint. That's the way she made extra money. Until she was in her 90s.
Is that what got your interest into art? Is that
probably
sort of the segue?
Probably.
And Keep Kingsport Beautiful.
Oh yes, that was something that, again, that's part of quality of life. And also, I've got a big background of my grandfather in trees. So that's one thing I planted. Every time I've ever moved, I've planted at least 8 or 10 trees in the yard. So
that's just is that a beautification project, basically, where awards are given for?
The Keep Kingsport Beautiful? Yes, that is a group of people that have, and it's sponsored by the city gets involved in it, and we are one of the sponsors. Blue Ridge Properties is the sponsor of it.
Okay.
Because we believe it does more to make people want to live here. But we have, if you have a neighbor, that you think does a beautiful job in keeping their yard, you can pick up the phone, call Keep Kingsport Beautiful, the committee, and say, I think you ought to look at such and such a yard. And then members of the committee go out and pick the winners. And some people are so proud that they've won 2 and 3 times. And I remember going to, having someone come up to me. We listed a house, and it was an estate, and we went to tour the house, and one of the children of the owner, who had recently died, came up to me and said, you don't know how much it meant that my mother and dad won the Beautification Award 3 times, and if you'll see, it's on their wall. They've had them framed, and how much it meant to them. So it's a very good program.
Yeah, it's something that seems to be catching too, Other neighbors see it and they want to.
That's right.
Improve their yards, and
that's right.
Good for the city.
It's very good for the city. I mean, we want to. I mean, every neighborhood that looks good certainly not only helps us sell houses, but also it means that other people like living here.
Definitely. As far as more on a personal level, what are the things that keep you going? The things that keep you motivated? And how do you maintain a balanced life?
Well, one of the most wonderful things was, as I said, I get to work with my children, which has been just delightful. Knowing children are great when they're little, but they're wonderful when they're adults, when you get to work with them and get to know them. And I've got 8 grandchildren, 6 of them live in Kingsport. By nature, I'm a pretty happy person. I love living here because we're outside so much. I've gone back to being involved with horses again, which I hadn't done in 30 years as I was raising children and getting the job started. So I trail ride. A lot of people may not know there's 1,000 miles of horseback riding trails within 2 hours of Kingsport.
Oh my.
Didn't know that, did you? And so I have people that I horseback ride with, and we throw the horses in a trailer and drive 2 miles and ride in the woods for 3 or 4 hours and not even ever see another person. I mean, there's Virginia Highland trails, there are just different horseback riding trails all over this whole area. So that's one thing that helps me balance. And I'm a person that likes to work in the yard.
I do too.
So, yeah. It is rewarding.
It is. It's very calming. I find it very calming.
Well, you see what you've done.
Exactly.
It's not like working all day with people.
Right.
Yeah.
Not that that's bad either.
That's not bad, but when you go home and you can work in the yard and you finish doing a flower bed or something, you can actually look and say, I've done that. And I finished it, but you never get finished with people.
Right. What does Valerie Joh have left to do? What else is in your future?
Enjoying life. It's been nice, as I said, to step back and see the children, they're not children anymore, but see my family run this business. It's taken the burden off that I don't have to do my daughter said, you don't have to do the worrying anymore, you let us do it now. So I still will be involved with it. I guess I always will. My husband's health is not as good as it has been, and so it's nice to be able to spend time with him. As I said, I have grandchildren in town, and I'm enjoying my life. I've enjoyed everything I'm doing right now.
Wonderful. As far as just to wrap things up, what would you say to other women and women in general as they play their part in shaping history? What words of advice or encouragement would you give?
Take chances. If I'd been an ultra-conservative person, I would never be here. One, I would never have bought the company. I would never have worked out ways that I could buy a building. I mean, people my age didn't do that. And then leverage one building to buy another building, and then leverage that building to buy another building. And, you know, I've made my life secure without depending on other people by taking chances. And some of them weren't the smartest ideas, and some of them have been. But I've always not been afraid on my own, because no one else has put a dime in this company but me. You know, my husbands were supportive, but they were not interested in being monetarily supportive in this. This was my baby. So be independent, take the chances, and sometimes you may fail, but you'll never succeed unless you try.
Definitely.